So what he decided to do was, based on his discussions with people across the organization and his analysis of the customer projects and the research projects, there was one project that became the candidate for this new architecture-centric approach. It was in better shape than the others in terms of its level of process discipline and its approach to software architecture. It was a much more modular architecture than the other projects. And so that became the leading project that was the candidate for basing this new architecture-centric approach on. So he decided we're going to have part of the organization devoted to creating an architecture and a set of components. The rest of the organization will build products from those components. And as we ramp up this new architecture-centric discipline within the organization, the proof of concept, the prototype, will be that leading project, and everybody else will learn from this and act as reviewers on what's going on in that organization. And we will gradually spread the word, spread the discipline, spread the stability of managing projects by having a common set of what we would now call core assets, rather than having every project or product development project operate independently. So in a way, this is a risky proposition. You're going to take a single product development effort and you're going to base what became a product line development effort. Your architecture for that product is determined to be suitable for use as what we would now call a product line architecture. And at the time, their evaluations of the architecture were nothing like an SEI architecture trade-off analysis method. It was simply informal reviews and talking with the architects and the developers that allowed him to determine which of these product development efforts could be the basis for this new architecture-centric approach. So the business case was simple. We can't continue to do business this way. We will never get into this world of integrated engine management systems if we continue to operate in this independent stovepipe fashion. In addition, the business plan had a number of explicit goals, like reducing the product cycle time, being able to turn out more products with the existing number of engineers. Although I have to say, when Temple made the decision to cancel the research projects, a number of people left. In fact, about 10% of the software engineering organization left because, well, you can imagine if you are a young engineer in Columbus, Indiana, and you think that, the organization is actually moving into the future by creating this object technology project, which is where everybody is going, and then this guy comes in from outside and says, no, we're not going to do that. So be prepared in your organization, if you appoint a product line champion, for that person to make decisions that you won't necessarily agree with. So what seems like a locally optimal thing to do in your mind, like moving into object technology, in Temple's mind, he had bigger problems to take on. And moving into object technology was much farther down on the list than stabilizing on an architecture-centric approach within the organization. Raul.
What percentage of the total engineering staff was that project that he selected to do core assets and the pilot? Because it says that all the rest of the stuff was put to do training or to do reviews. So how much of that?
Yeah, of the 100 or so software engineers, I don't know exactly how many were on that leading project. I don't know how those 100 were distributed across those projects. But I mean, they're relatively small teams. 100 people across 6 customer projects and 12 research projects. So it's not a huge amount.
So he probably put like 75% of the people to do nothing about the product line.
No, not do nothing. I mean, they would still have to meet current customer obligations under the old way of doing things. Yeah. Yeah, it's not as though you stop the world and then tell your customers, okay, well, you're going to have to wait while we get our house in order. In fact, one thing the case study doesn't say, which I wish it did, was how do the customers react, especially the 6 customer projects that were underway. Yeah. So, we're not going to deliver until whenever because we need to clean up our own act.
Case study cite how they funded this?
Yes, and we'll get to that. Yeah. So they wanted to shave some time off the product cycle time. They wanted to improve the quality. They also saw this architecture-centric approach as a risk reduction by having a quality set of components shared across multiple product development efforts. They saw rolling out this architecture-centric approach that became a product line approach as a 6-step process. So this set of steps comes from Cummins, and we have mapped this to the practice areas in the framework, even though at the time Cummins was not consciously doing this. In fact, the architect for this, Jim Dager, came to one of our early product line conferences and recognized that, the kinds of things that you guys are talking about in the framework are exactly the kinds of things that we've been doing at Cummins. We just didn't use your terminology. We didn't think of ourselves as enacting these practice areas, but in effect, that's what we have done. So their 6-step process is shown here, and we have taken that 6-step process and mapped it as best as we can to the practice areas in the framework. So it's not an exact match, but you'll see how they covered the essentials. So coming up with this whole idea of an architecture-centric approach meant we're going to have a group devoted to creating the architecture and components, which is essentially what we would now call a core asset group. They relied a great deal on legacy software because that's where their intellectual capital was tied up. In fact, there was a conscious decision to reuse as much as they could from the leading project, plus incorporate some of the features that were planned for the research projects. Establish this 2-part structure of what we would now call core asset development and product development, and modify, rehabilitate, wrap the legacy software wherever possible to conform to the product line architecture, standardize on a workflow and a tool set that was common across the organization, and get a first product, a real product, out the door as a proof of concept of this new architecture-centric way of doing things, and then follow that with succeeding products and learn from that, start collecting metrics about the effectiveness of the process and the development effort that led to the first product. So in terms of the software engineering practice area, we get the architecture definition practice area from that leading project, the one that had the architecture that was in better shape than the other product architects or architectures. The understanding of relevant domains, you had a lot of that already within the organization, plus you had the additional domain knowledge that Temple brought from Ford in the area of integrated engine management systems. So upper level management in Cummins recognized that they didn't have the combination of engineering and management skills to do this in-house, and went outside the organization to Detroit. Select the legacy software. Again, you get your architecture from that, and what they essentially did was, by reusing as much as they could from the legacy software, was the practice area that we call mining existing assets. There was also a conscious decision at the time that we are not going to go outside the organization to bring in any commercial off-the-shelf software. In fact, at the time, I don't know if there was any commercially available software for integrated engine management systems. I know things have changed since then. And having the two-part structure, core asset and product development groups, meant that you have one group creating an architecture. Therefore, they also have to assess the quality of the architecture by doing an architecture evaluation. They also have to populate the architecture by mining as much as they can from the existing in-house products. As I said, the architecture evaluation was not a formal analysis of the quality attributes in the way an ATAM trade-off analysis would do, but they did look at quality attributes like performance and reliability, for example. Workflow and tool set maps to the technical management practice area. Piloting the first application meant that there was some additional component development over and above the components that they were able to salvage from the leading project. It also meant ensuring that the architecture evaluation guaranteed that the features and the quality attributes of the product needed soonest, the pilot project, would be incorporated into the architecture. And then they followed that up with their standard process for requirements engineering, integration, and testing. In fact, like most organizations that restructure around product lines or architecture, they have two levels of testing, one done at the core asset level and then another done at the product development level. And then roll out subsequent products based on the success of that first pilot project. And in fact, they were successful in getting that product out in about a year. So for whatever customer was the first candidate for the new architecture-centric way of doing things, they suffered a schedule slip of about a year. Yeah, because he came in 1993, he halted the projects in 1994, and by about 1995, I think early 1995, the first product was launched. So it's not a first product from a completely operating product line, but it's a step on the way towards migrating to a product line organization by having the architecture and the components in place. In terms of the technical management practice areas, the one that we call make, buy, mine, commission analysis is crossed out here because that was a no-brainer. The decision was it's all going to be mining, reusing as much as we can from our legacy system. Part of establishing the core group meant standardizing on a process for configuration management. The scope of what became the product line was the 6 customer projects plus the 12 research projects. Remember how in a product line, when you're doing the analysis of features and commonality and variability, and you are looking at an existing set of products, you don't want to lock in just that set of products as your product line. You need to be proactive about looking to the future, and that's what these 12 research projects were doing. Yes, Bill?
The solid one?
There's a stronger connection to configuration management in the mapping to the tool set. So, as I said, most of these, there's a rough mapping, but it's not a true one-to-one mapping because they weren't totally operating in the spirit of the framework. So the mapping is not always clear-cut, especially as we'll see in the organizational management practice area. And technical planning then was the process that gave them part of the what we would now call the production plan. Legacy software, and this one we've already seen in the software engineering practice areas. So the configuration management, process discipline, technical planning, and tool support, all of that was based on Temple's vision of bringing a stable set of processes and a stable set of tools to the development of a set of reusable components and an architecture that would support multiple product development efforts. So their process discipline essentially became having the champion in place, having a person like Temple, having an architect from the leading product development effort become the architect for an entire line of products, and then doing the necessary kind of technical planning at the core asset level and at the product development level. So you have a change in the organizational structure. You have people creating an architecture and components who are now in the critical path of the developers. This didn't exist before in the organization. This is the kind of cultural change that you as a would-be product line organization will be faced with. So you need to have somebody like a Ron Temple who's in a position to make these structural changes and to control the money. And we'll talk about money very shortly. So once you get the first product out the door, start collecting some basic measures about this architecture-centric effort. How long did it take to create particular assets? What percentage of software in the product development efforts comes from the components, from the core assets, and so on. And rolling out subsequent products based on having an established success with the first pilot product. So this is like going back around the loop in the ideal model to learn from the experience. And in particular for Cummins, the goal was to start this thing off in the automotive group and then take it out to the other business units, the power generation and the industrial business units. So there was a conscious learning effort and a conscious effort to track the progress on the leading product and the subsequent products. In the organizational management category, the developing an acquisition strategy practice area is crossed out because they were not going to do any of this by subcontracting. This was a totally in-house effort. The business case, we have seen, they wanted to reduce costs, reduce the cycle time, increase the reliability. There isn't a direct mapping to some of these, like market analysis and operations. It's not to say that they didn't do a market analysis. Cummins certainly has an organization capable of doing that sort of thing. They just didn't see market analysis as being an essential component of their 6-step process for this architecture-centric way. Launching and institutionalizing is the practice area in the framework that orchestrates all of these other practice areas. So the launching and institutionalization practice area essentially was embodied in Ron Temple and his vision of an architecture-centric approach, and supported by people like Jim Dager, who became the product line architect. Organizational planning and structuring the organization, we will talk more about those. Organizational planning, again, involved what we would now call the production strategy. And so the overall approach that Temple brought in was, first of all, focused on the discipline of an architecture-centric approach, and then later became what Cummins now regards as their Core 1 product line. And we will see how that has evolved since then into the second generation Core 2 product line. And I'll say more about how they structured the organization. We'll see that it's a variant of one of the organizational models that we saw in the structuring practice area. The concept of operations was not like our more formal way of representing a product line organization now. We encourage people to describe the concept of operations of a product line organization in terms of roles and responsibilities like product line manager, product line architect, and so on. Ron Temple was not a product line manager. He was a vice president of engineering. The people he took from the project to create this virtual team were simply called architects and developers. But essentially, he had a concept of operation by imposing the discipline of, well, first off, I, Ron Temple, am in charge, and so all of these product development efforts are accountable to me. Secondly, I'm structuring the organization into this two-part structure where we have dependencies created between the architecture and component group and the product development group, and there are reporting relationships and responsibilities in there that didn't exist before. And I, as the product line manager, supported by my product line architect and my key core asset developers, are the people who are going to maintain the discipline of keeping this concept of operations all working in concert with this organizational structure. And again, piloting the first application and getting subsequent products out as part of this overall plan for migrating to an architecture-centric organization.